you who just joined, I will add again, oops, let me get this off my screen, that we will be starting in a couple of minutes. We want to give enough people time to join us before they get there, or before we start. Ah, did you all lose that screen? Okay, let me try and find it. Give me 1 second. There we go. Is it back?
It's back. Yeah.
Great. I promise everyone the presentation will go much better than these first couple minutes where I'm struggling. So it looks like we've kind of evened out on the participation, the participants joining. So I think we will get started. First, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We know your time is all pressing and you have many, many things to do. But we do really want to thank you for joining us today to develop a strategy around how to operationalize our collaboration's vision to embed shared print into the collection lifecycle. Lifecycle, I did it again. So just so everyone knows, my favorite thing to do is to call it the collection lifestyle, which I'm hoping someday we'll pick up. But until then, it's still the life cycle. The goal of our webinar today is to provide you with an introduction to the lifecycle document, to report back on focus group discussions we recently conducted with practitioners around our document, and to invite another layer of review and feedback before finalizing the document as a living outline of what we're trying to achieve. And all of those we'll talk more in depth in a little bit. But before we get started, a quick moment for housekeeping. Everyone has been muted, and we ask that you please continue to do this until the open discussion time. And at that time, you can use your chat, raise your hand, or unmute. I do want to say at any time you can ask or use your chat question during the presentation, and one of us will select that question, put it aside so that we will get to it after. We really want this to be, throughout the entire session, an opportunity for you to share your reactions, your thoughts, or ideas. So please don't hold back in that chat, even if it's not the open discussion time. As we mentioned in our message, we will be recording these webinars in order to share them with the library community, and we will plan to post them on our website along with the summary of the discussion today. And on the screen and in chat, you'll shortly see a link to a public comment document. This has links to the documents we'll reference during this discussion, the open discussion questions if you want to start thinking ahead, and a space to add any comments or questions you may have during the presentation. And like the chat, please feel free to add anything now or throughout the discussion today. So with that said, let's get right into it. So in early 2020, the California Digital Library, the Center for Research Libraries, and HathiTrust announced that our organizations would work together to build on a decade of collaboration, innovation, and expertise to define a new phase of shared print built on open and interconnected infrastructure. This collaborative effort is emerging from the rich background of local and regional shared print program expansions, interconnection, and technical innovation. We really saw an opportunity for our three organizations to step into a facilitative leadership role, to gather the threads of a broader community's efforts, and to advance shared shared print's transition to a new phase of integration and interoperability. So ultimately, our vision for the collaboration is that the future of shared print collections is shared. Embedding shared print within the life cycle of library collections promotes equity of access, enriches the scholarly record, and increases opportunities for research and teaching. A well-developed collaborative and interoperable infrastructure ensures we will realize the full potential of our networks and their collective collections. Our collaboration is truly committed to shared print's integration into the library ecosystem. We see this collaboration as an opportunity to shift the shared print paradigm so that the work is not tangential to the traditional collection, but fully integrated into the life cycle of collections. So this means from acquisitions to discovery and resource sharing and beyond. As part of this work, this past January, the collaboration launched the Collection Comparison Tool to advance equity of collection decision-making. Since then, we've been busy focusing on embedded shared print into the collection lifecycle, which actually brings us to why we're here today and where we need your help. This past year, we've focused on working on developing a narrative that begins to envision ways to embed shared print into the collection lifecycle. This culminated in a document currently titled Shared Print in the Collections Lifecycle. This document envisions how to embed shared print into the lifecycle in the areas of selection and acquisition, processing and cataloging, shelving, discovery, resource sharing, and assessment and collection management. While many of these are unique units within libraries, this document groups them into processes involved in each area rather than individual departments. Since we've shared the document with the group, and our discussion may delve into these areas in some details, we opted to not go in depth into the details of the document right now, but we do want to encourage you to have it open as the preservation continues. And you should have the URL in the chat and we can share it again shortly, just so that you can follow along. And before I turn it over to my collaborator, Allison, I did want to take a minute because I realized I neglected to introduce myself, which I'm very sorry. My name is Heather Welton. I am the Shared Print Program Officer for HathiTrust. My preferred pronouns are she and her. And I'm going to ask Allison and Amy, my collaborators, to introduce themselves as they present. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Wohlers to discuss the focus groups we had and some high-level findings from those. So Allison, take it away.
Great, thank you, Heather, and thanks for advancing to the first slide in my section. Hi, everyone, I am Allison Wohlers, and I am the Shared Print Program Manager at California Digital Library, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. So in advance of the webinar, we shared a document. In addition to that, Shared Print in the Life Cycle of Collections document that summarizes the background and themes of the practitioner focus groups that we coordinated in April. Now, if you didn't receive that document, or if you haven't had a chance to look at it, no problem at all. I believe someone has just entered it into the chat, so you can take a look now. And I'm going to take the next few slides, to flesh those out a little bit more. So as part of mapping the collection's life cycle and how various communities envision shared print fitting in, we wanted to incorporate practitioner feedback in major areas of the collection's life cycle in order to refine the vision and also surface areas for discussion with the larger community. So to do this, we designed focus groups that targeted particular areas of the life cycle, essentially those outlined by Heather in the previous slides. So acquisition, selection, cataloging, etc. This gave us the opportunity to hear in depth from practitioners specializing in those areas. Participants were identified through a variety of networks, including the Rosemont Shared Print Alliance and the Partnership for Shared Book Collections, and included those with extensive experience in shared print and also those who had less or very little exposure to shared print previously. So we had a really nice range of perspectives of folks who had been steeped in this space and those who were bringing pretty fresh perspectives and helping us to really question some of the assumptions we have around our thinking with shared print and other areas of librarianship. So the focus group participants were asked a range of questions, some specific to their particular area of focus, like discovery or resource sharing. But we asked all of the focus groups three main questions around how shared print and collective collections are or could be effectively embedded in the work of their particular domain, what trends are affecting their domain, and the role of collective collections within them, and how the life cycle, specifically the life cycle document, can be clarified or enhanced. Next slide, please, Heather. Great, thank you. So from those discussions, we synthesized two primary outputs. So first of all, there were a number of specific pieces of feedback related to the clarity and completeness of the life cycle document. So for example, we heard from participants that the concept of equitable discovery needs more specific definition to be effective. Participants also observed missing pieces in the life cycle document, like reference services and preservation. So for that kind of feedback, we have created essentially a laundry list of areas and points to clarify, and those have been incorporated into the commenting version of the shared print in the Lifecycle of Collections document. So everyone can see them, and also to ensure that feedback is not lost. So if you're in that Lifecycle document right now, you'll see a whole bunch of comments from me, which are labeled as PFG, Practitioner Focus Group. So you can see what kinds of specific comments came up during those discussions. And then secondly, we also synthesized broad cross-cutting themes that came up in multiple groups and in a variety of ways. You'll see those on this slide in the sub-bullets. Let's see here. And it's really these that we're most excited to share broadly and use as the basis for more discussion around the vision for embedding shared print in the life cycle of collections. So just to expand a little bit on each. Probably the number one theme that emerged from the focus group discussions across these domains, and which may not be a surprise to many, was creating an effective data economy in our networked shared print ecosystem. So specifically, we heard about this in terms of the ability for individual libraries and groups of libraries to access data sets connected to shared collections and integrate them into various library services, be it discovery, resource sharing, collection management, any of those areas. There is a fundamental need for the availability of large, comprehensive data sets, but also the ability to customize what libraries take out of those large data sets and how those extracts are folded into local systems and services. The data needs are also quite varied. So they encompass descriptive and administrative metadata, as well as both quantitative and qualitative metrics needs. Also, as we continue to move into an era of gathering and managing data sets around our collective collections, we need to be thinking in new and innovative ways about how we track and assess collection value. So this came up in the focus groups in terms of, trying to understand value lost by not participating or engaging in collaborative solutions for print management, or thinking about new ways to think about use, not just in terms of quantitative data and circulation statistics, but how can we track the quality of use? Those are some of the ways that innovative thinking about gathering data came up. Focus groups discussions also highlighted, per the second theme on this slide, that there are still many flavors of shared print and collective collections being defined at small and large scales, as well as collaborative networks not explicitly associated with shared print or collective collections, but that will be important for embedding shared print into library services. So thinking in terms of resource sharing expert groups or cataloging collaborative networks. So for us to realize a vision of embedding shared print in the life cycle of collections, we need to work to connect and in some way unify or harmonize both network and grassroots efforts. We also heard about the challenges of sustaining the work that goes into developing and managing shared collections. Shared print and collective collections are arguably still occupying a space of special projects rather than being integrated into daily workflows, expectations, and policies. This probably means missed opportunities and more effort for those on the ground doing the work. Therefore, we took as a theme from focus group discussions that embedding shared print into the life cycle of collections needs to facilitate a shift from thinking about the work in terms of special project to daily work. And this is something that has come up in our shared print community space before. So we can continue to think through this together. Connected to that is the cross-cutting theme that we still lack capacity for easy model building across key areas. So cost models, economic models, what is the economy that supports this kind of shared collection? Newly emergent and of high priority is also diversity, equity, and inclusion models to shape shared print and collective collections. So there's a lot of work to do there, and likely our facility to build models has a lot to do with how we build that data economy that serves community needs and how we harmonize the various levels of efforts, as mentioned in previous themes I've gone over here. Finally, it was clear from focus group discussions that the domains as defined are highly interconnected. And enhancements to infrastructure, whether we're talking about social infrastructure or technical infrastructure, will only be effective if that interconnectedness plays a part in the design. So those were the 5 major themes that we synthesized from the very rich and far-reaching feedback of the practitioners in these focus groups. And I just have to say that we emerged from these groups feeling very inspired and motivated. So I'll close this reporting on the focus groups by sending very sincere and grateful thanks to the participants. Next slide, please, Heather. We do have some specific questions coming up, discussion questions that Amy is going to introduce us to in a moment. But we did want to pause at this point in the presentation and invite questions or comments attendees have on the focus group themes. So if something is resonating with you in particularly, what doesn't resonate and what might benefit from clarification? So again, you can feel free to enter any comments or questions you have in the chat. Please feel free to unmute and share with us verbally, or you can go into that discussion document and enter in observations or questions. And so I'm just going to pause for a minute and embrace a little silence and check the discussion document. Thank you, Heather, for sticking the discussion document back in the chat. And we do have a question from Susan. I'm wondering if there was input from scholarly communication folks and or publishers, particularly academic presses, or are there future plans for engagement with these groups? That is such a good question, Susan. So you may have observed, I know you have observed in the Lifecycle document that we don't have a section really for the publisher kind of side of this. And I think that's a really good question of how and where to bring those kinds of pieces into this discussion. So no, the answer is no, we did not really bring in input from publishers or definitely not academic presses. And we don't currently, and Amy and Heather can correct me, have a sort of avenue to bring in that feedback. But I'd be curious to hear what you and others on this call think about the relative priority of bringing in that perspective and where it might fit within the Lifecycle document.
Yeah, I'll just add that, as I mentioned, we really focus the document on sort of units and processes within the library right now. And so I think there's definite other opportunities to bring in other university areas that might work with the library, but I think we didn't do that for this first iteration. So I agree with Allison. It would be great to hear how you all could see future iterations of life cycles outside of maybe library specific areas.
Yeah, and I do feel like, and just to follow up one more bit on that piece of publishing, not being a selection or acquisition expert, but it did seem like, you know, that piece of how we engage publishers and the scholarly communication kind of side of things did come up maybe in a sort of roundabout way when we were talking about moving shared print into more of a collaborative collection development space or prospective collaboration around print materials and how it relates to acquiring things in digital form and in print form, and how to support decision making around that. And then I'm seeing another comment in the chat from Jeff. I'm very interested in seeing the ecosystem built in a way that would enable local folks to implement local policy. Yeah, that's really important, to act and retain. To me, there is a strong analogy to our somewhat highly automated resource sharing decision-making processes. For example, I would think we should be able to give our description staff some simple rules that would, enabled by automated alerts, allow them to commit stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Allison, maybe I'll jump in. I think that's a really interesting comment, Jeff, because, and everyone, because I think we are always looking, that's one of the, I guess, to in integrating people, I mean, just the day-to-day and integrating shared print into the day-to-day, you know, having it embedded in those every action that we do, you know, when we're checking something out, when we're looking, when we're creating descriptive metadata, when we're doing any of that. But one of the interesting things that came out of the one focus group was how that there's sometimes conflict between policies and practices when groups in perhaps they're represented in those domains, those separate domains, are not physically near each other. So there could be a policy that this is allowed, you know, this, we should put this item into the shared repository, but then when it gets to that repository and there's additional checking that's being done, you know, because of their practices, they find that it doesn't actually fit the overall policy. So there's some conflict there, and how to resolve that conflict in a smooth way and a way that brings everyone together. I found that a very interesting piece of one of the discussions, and something, and we didn't talk too much about policies, and as you can see in the life cycle, there's no sort of layer or connecting tissue for policies and practices that bring us together. But I think we're hoping that we can build on that. Did that, Allison, do you, and Heather, do you think that, do you agree about, I mean, in that representation of that sort of discussion in that focus group?
Yeah, Amy, I think that was a really good connection. And I'm seeing Jeff did respond to your comment as well.
It's true that a conflict is a long tail problem. And you know, and I think one of the things that we really value in shared print or in this community, anything or a collective collection when we're working together, is the diversity of institutions, the diversity of practices, the diversity of material, and there is bound to be conflict, and needing to work those out is really helpful.
Yeah, you know, I was also reminded by Jeff's comment of the conversation we had in one of the focus groups about, and we emphasize this in the themes, the need for access to large data sets, or the need for access to make decisions, but then the ability for institutions to really customize and overlay their own sort of models. And I think, you know, with this, like you're saying, Jeff, the information needs to be there, and then folks need to have agency to then make decisions based on the information. And we saw a couple folks plus oneing the comment from Jeff. So thanks everybody. And Amy, you're smiling. Do you have something to add?
No, I mean, I think it's, no, I think it's always, I just see that as a sign of support. And it is, and that I think is the way this community works, that when ideas resonate, they offer that support. So I think that that's.
And I'm seeing a comment come through in the discussion document, and it's still kind of coming together, but I'll just read the first part of it. What I don't think I see in the document is a discussion of how to best identify material that needs a retention commitment. One aspect is to make visible material with high use. Yeah, so understanding maybe what is missing, or you know, what is absent from all of our collective collections. We have this amazing registry, the Print Archives Preservation Registry. How do we then identify, you know, what are we missing in all of that? And I think the ILL idea is a really interesting one. Heather and Amy, do you want to jump in there?
I don't think I have anything to add. I do think it's definitely something that we often talk about, especially in shared print and needs. So I think it's a very great point.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this comment, Jeff, that making shared print commitments maybe visible or actionable through things other than massive analysis projects. So like, again, moving from special project to daily work. So I'm just going to check the discussion document one more time before I hand things over to Amy. And I think folks are actually responding to the questions, Amy. So why don't I hand things over to you, and we can just move right into those discussion questions.
That's great. Hi everyone. I'm Amy Wood. I'm the head of metadata and discovery enhancement at the Center for Research Libraries, and my pronouns are she and her. And as you can see on the screen right now, those are the 5 questions we wanted to discuss today. But you are welcome to, you know, add your own questions or relate them, you know, back to those main themes that Allison introduced. This really, you know, we're depending on your engagement here to really shape our discussion. So these questions are just a starting off point. But I think at this point we were going to unshare the screen, and just so that we could all see each other a little bit better to facilitate the discussion, make it a little more friendly. And do feel free to unmute yourselves and just go ahead and add your comments or questions. So the first question that I wanted to offer is, how do we move the collective collection from idea to action? And just to give this question a little context, I think there are a variety of ways of approaching it. You know, earlier I mentioned the sort of wealth of diversity of institutions, of approaches, of policies, all of these things. So those affect the way we our ideas about these things and our ability to move from idea to action. We also found in the focus groups that not everyone defined collective collection in the same way. And some of this was from just from their own experiences, or just the mental model they had developed because of the information that they have taken in over time. And so, so we really wanted to tease out a little bit more about this. How do we move the collective collection from idea to action when we're starting at a point where perhaps we don't all share the same idea of what that collective collection means, or even know what it means at all?
Amy, I do. Oh, maybe Bob is about to jump in.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts, Amy, to that question. With respect to collective collection and the lack of agreement on what that means, not only in terms of semantics of a sentence, but uh, how we implement the idea in real life. Your group have done an excellent job so far of outlining a series of important issues. Have you have you tried to come to terms with a definition? I mean, in effect, the partnership of the three groups sponsoring this meeting has gone quite a ways toward outlining how that might work. But have you thought about defining collective collection, putting it out for, say, discussion at a PAN meeting or another forum like this, granting that thousands of people who might be affected by the definition might not pay attention right away, which brings me to my second point. I'm surprised, and maybe shouldn't be, about how communication works and doesn't work among the work domains that you've defined in your document. And in any given library, large or small, again, I'm amazed at how much people claim not to know about what their colleagues are up to. So anything that your group of three institutions or the partnership can do to help improve local communication channels about this would be a great achievement.
I think that's a really interesting point, Bob, about whether or not, a question about whether or not we had defined it or collective collection, or if we hadn't. And we did preface each one of the discussions with the focus groups that we were at this point sort of using shared print and collective collections as, you know, with the same meaning, or at the same, you know, that if we use the term in the discussion, they were referring to the same thing, even though I think if they are not quite the same thing, but for the purposes of the discussion, we use them. And it really made me think about the evolution of this work, I think at least over the past decade, and how when we began the paper database and started registering shared print commitments, we thought of it as the print preservation, and that's why it's called, that's why it has print preservation in the title, the paper registry. So and then we sort of moved as we began to talk about access, and as the type of material that we were including in these collections broadened, we started talking about access and sharing those collections, and we began to talk about it as shared print, and now it is sort of moving into this concept of collective collection, which really broadens it from that collection that's sitting in that repository to those areas of selection and acquisition. And so it's a much more encompassing concept, I think. I think it's a much more forward-thinking concept. I think it's a much more inclusive concept. So I'd be glad to hear what if anyone on the call has aspects that they think should go into the definition, or have already defined it for themselves and would like to share that. because I think this is something that we see as coming, you know, as defined in the community, not really top down.
Hi, this is Tony. We did, one of the early working groups did put together a definition of collective collections, and it's a Wikipedia entry now. And we currently have a best practices group, shared print awareness and education. And these are some of the questions, in fact, that we're going to be looking at. When we're talking about education and awareness, we're not just talking about library directors, degreed librarians, but we're talking about staff members. We're talking about even administration, faculty themselves. I noticed there was a great comment in the chat about feeling uneasy about shared print because, you know, the faculty requests, particularly with books that were purchased via faculty request. I'd be curious to know some more about that comment and why that would make people uneasy. But these are all things that we're going to be looking at. And so I think we are scheduled, and Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, for August to have something out there.
I'll comment on that because I made that comment. I'm Tim. I'm the business librarian and current interim assistant head of collections at San Diego State. And a lot of our humanities librarians have been very hesitant of this idea. And a big part of it too is we also, between, you know, the CSU Plus shared lending program we have with the CSUs, we have another one locally called Circuit with the public libraries, USD and UCSD. And a lot of our print materials that are purchased for faculty go to these other schools that are working on a more e-preferred kind of monograph acquisition model. And we're not financed in a way to, our entire monograph budget is 300,000. So we're, you know, stretching it pretty thin. So we still buy primarily print, but we've had instances where faculty complain about books that they've requested going out to other libraries. And from the standpoint of those selectors, that's what they're worried about, that if we do a collective collection strategy, right, where you can't buy something that's owned by another university in the system or something, that the readiness of access won't be there for those faculty requests.
Thanks, that's a good explanation and gives us something to think about. I know that so we're with East, and I know that the way East handled it was, it of course gave us the retention list on that end, and then allowed us to agree or disagree to anything on that list. And then from the other end, as far as purchasing goes, we're not currently doing community purchasing, but I sort of encourage myself to do it, I guess you could say. So when I am purchasing outside of faculty requests, I do look to see what might better fit the entire East collection. But at the same time, I would have the right to purchase anything that the faculty requested. And I would assume, and again, this is going to be up to your shared print program, could be different. I would always assume that I would always have the option to not make that item part of the collection, the shared collection.
Right.
And I might point out that one thing that we're going to have to deal with is the pandemic has actually proven the point of people who are naysayers to the shared print approach, because in the UC system, we've not been able to share materials for 15 months between the 10 campuses, and it's been devastating on research. And when I say prove the point, I mean, what I really mean is that it underscores the concerns or reinforces the concerns. I personally am very pro shared print and involved in the shared print or the partnership for shared print. But we do have to realize there is a very intense, and very vocal, but perhaps a small minority of faculty who are rabidly opposed to the thought of their collections going away, disappearing, or being merged with others remotely. And so just something that we're going to have to manage. It's going to be part of our operations or our reality for some time.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to point out there are a number of comments in the chat, but one that came through, you know, in response to the discussion, you know, asked the question, you know, how many times does that really happen when a faculty member knows that the library purchased a book and now they can't get their hands on it because someone else is, you know, has already requested it. So I think that that question of how many times do these things happen, I think that's not something that's definitely something I think we need better information about. And I think that really leads into the second question of how can we create a better data ecosystem? Is it, you know, just creating a giant data lake is not necessarily always the answer. Each one of the domains, as Allison pointed out, were invested in different types of metadata. It's not all descriptive, it's not all number of holdings, and how they use that data was very different. So how can we create a better data ecosystem that does address, you know, production and distribution, consumption, and maintenance of all this data?
And Amy, I will add, people have added several comments to the open document already too about this one.
I probably need a little help reading all these things. Let's see.
Sure. Do you want me to read them out?
That would be great.
Okay. So there are several. So the first is free up the data so no one has proprietary control over formal commitment data. The other one says that the collaboration tool for serials retention is a great start. Another says open APIs. Then there's advocate with ILS vendors, the folio projects, etc. for data workflow integrations. And the last one currently listed is break down the silos between resource sharing and acquisitions.
So I'm wondering if any of the folks that, or anyone on the call really would like to address some of the comments that were added, because I think they're all really great points. But I'm wondering how does it how having those different pieces, how does that bring us together in a better data ecosystem? So I think that's one of the things we're looking at, not just, you know, I need that, or I need this, or, you know, which group that advocates the most to the different vendors gets their, you know, features in the queue, on the development queue sooner. How do we approach it so that we enrich the full data ecosystem?
It does look like people are responding to Amy in the discussion document. So that's great.
Would you like to go ahead and read them, or?
Yeah, you know, there are some comments in progress. Here's one that I think gets to your question. Let's keep in mind that this entire endeavor is a service, and discovery and access are through time in response to user system needs, or to user system needs is user needs is the only goal. Sorry, I kind of butchered that, but I think it gets to the really strong idea of collections as services. So with all of these pieces that we're trying to pull together, the end goal is providing a service. And I invite the person who wrote that comment to expand on it if they would like to.
Hey, Allison, that was me.
Thanks, Jack. Go ahead, jump in.
No, I think Tim, it sort of starts with what Tim was saying. I think, you know, the idea that people who need things go through systems, and we respond in those systems in the way they asked. When someone asks us to borrow a book, we borrow it. When someone wants a book, they somehow care. I don't think they really care more that we have it. They care more that they get it in the format they want later, the way they want it. And we have to build a data ecosystem that discovery knows about that. We tend to think about describing things and putting them somewhere as one set of workflows, and responding to user needs or system needs. I don't mean users like patrons. The users could be our digitization people. It could be all kinds of reasons. Could be for big data use. When we keep the idea of buying away from the idea of borrowing, we've made a mistake. And if we can put those things together, I think what Tim is talking about is it's a story all of us can tell. It's a story about people asking us the wrong question and wanting a certain answer when they shouldn't care very much. We all went to library school. They're asking a level 4 question, and we need to get them back to level 3, which is, you want the book, we'll get you the book, and we'll get it to you quickly. And if we build a system that's built around that idea, instead of 2 ideas, which I think is what we've done now. One is about deciding whether we're going to have it and keep it, and another is, how do we get somebody access to it? A data system that really breaks that silo down. And I know some universities have done that departmentally, where acquisitions has been taken, I don't want to say out of tech services, but more closely integrated, at least with returnables, borrowing. I think we're moving in the right direction. And so we don't want to say this is just about 583s. We want to say this is about the system by which people find, get, and decisions get made about what is available, to digitize it, to make it CDL, sorry, Allison, CDL-able. I just think we need to remember the data model we have now is probably not the right data model. Thanks.
I think that's a really good point about the data model maybe not being the right one. And as someone who's been embedded in the data for a decade, that does resonate with me. And I think that, and it does reflect, I think, the evolution of thinking and even naming of this activity that we're doing. So to have the same data model, despite changing ideas and changing activities around that, is limiting. So that I think is a very, very interesting. I think the next question, and I just want to say that as we go through these questions, feel free to jump back to a previous one. Just tell us which one you're jumping back to before you give the answer. But I think that point about having maybe the wrong model or the wrong way of thinking about it, or the need to, as Jeff was saying, to have one activity move from one domain to another, gets to the next question, I think, and that's what do you see as the future of collective collections in these areas or domains, the different ones, the selection, acquisition, cataloging, etc. Because at least in thinking about this, we were really thinking there's sort of 2 ways we can kind of supplement what we do now. And I think that's an approach we took with add the 583s, that gives a lot more information. It's additional work we're doing, and all of that. So it's sort of a supplement to what we're doing now, or really change what we were doing in a sort of in a more radical way, in sort of in a disruptive way, where we're really sort of changing that model, those domains that we have. So in embedding in shared print or collective collections in the life cycle of collections, are we maintaining and supplementing this life cycle model, or are we're disrupting, making something new?
And Amy, there's an interesting comment in the document under that question. Someone talks about having better access to e-copies for uses that e can support, controlled digital lending, brittle books, exceptions for open, be more explicit about the preservation and access complementarities as preserved e-versions are discoverable and available alongside partially and completely retained print versions. So I think maybe this is connecting us up to the various, maybe connecting back to Susan Stern's earliest comment about, how do we connect to the publishing side of this? And also another comment we heard in our focus groups, which was, where does copyright fit into how we're thinking about this life cycle?
And I think the question also gets to that at what point do we really consider having a collective collection, or are we still thinking about like CDL and adding metadata so that someone else in another domain can see it? But it's still that divide between our collection and the collection we can get through the community or collective action. Is still there with those. So the question is really sort of getting, how can we get, what do we do to, presuming that that true collective collection is what we're looking for. What is the route towards that?
So Amy, if I can jump in here, one of the things you said, and I really loved how you just said it, and I think it's the first time you said it this way, or I've heard it this way, that I love, that might really add to this, and so I'll reiterate it. The real question I felt like about this and about how we do our work around collective collections and libraries is, do we need to supplement systems and services and things we already have by adding more to them? Or do we see ourselves needing to disrupt, make something new, get louder in how we do collective collections? And so I really want to make sure we don't miss this, because this has been kind of a talkative group. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Oh, and I see Mary Miller has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jeff, I just wanted to go to your comment about get louder, Heather. What do you mean by get louder? Because from what I heard from a past group, there are some issues with some of the services we're receiving that prevent us from operationalizing the data parts of this work. And do we have any like collective way of acting or advocating more strongly? And we can step back from that specific thing, but I am interested in what are ways we can get louder to think about how to provide efficiencies at this critical mass that we need to for this to be really effective.
Yeah, and maybe a way to think about it rather than get louder is really disrupt, right? Do we keep trying to work with what we have and doing one-offs? Or do we start to shift our attention and develop new things that work for us all? And I guess that's maybe more of my question. But you know me, I like to yell, so.
So Heather and Amy, this is Bob again. This may be tangential to the idea of disruption or even to the question as posed, but how, whether in your recent focus groups or elsewhere, how prevalent is an understanding of the concept of a life cycle for a collection? The old notion of collection is buy it, put it on the shelf, where most of them will gather dust, and it'll be there until the dust buries it or the building burns. So I wonder if an idea of life cycle as something more than that is not pervasive in the library community now, how difficult will it be for us to claim a life cycle approach across libraries and partnerships? Does that make sense?
It did, Bob.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and maybe it's because I speak Bob. I don't know. But I think one of our ultimate goals for this, Bob, and I think if I'm understanding you correctly, it's sort of, we're using this term, the life cycle of collections, that we might understand as one thing, but how prevalent is that in the community, especially the library community, and how can we think about that more holistically? And one of the goals that our collaboration has really talked about is getting this concept of life cycle of collections out there. Right? And so we're starting with shared print because it's the place to start, and it's where we have our expertise and our knowledge. But that's where I think we really need to rely on the community of you all and beyond, and the libraries to really start thinking about things holistically and really start thinking about the life cycle of collections. So I don't know, Amy, if you'd have anything to add.
Yeah, I did want to add that it is, in some ways, I think it's calling us out a little bit on the life cycle. So I appreciate that, Bob. I like to be called out on my assumptions, because we started with an older model, right? I mean, that this life cycle model we have is one that is, you'll see in publications around. You'll see it around. It's not something we took something that was already there and adapted it for us, but we didn't really change it. And when we asked people to comment on it, we asked them in a way that sort of reinforced the different domains. Can you comment on the domains? Can you comment on the tasks that we put in under it? I don't think we actually asked, is this the right model? Do these domains need to change? Have we done the right thing? So I think that's a great check on us and exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. But I also think that's a great question for going forward and coming up with a better model, which gets back to the one of the themes that Allison brought out, that we do lack models for a lot of different things in this area, but perhaps that life cycle is one where we are lacking.
And I think I also heard Bob, you saying, reference the focus groups and how this idea may have come up there. And I think, there in different focus groups, we heard so much about the interconnectedness of things, or the lack thereof, and the need for it. So if shared print only comes up, when a library is doing inventory, but not, when it's being described or acquired, et cetera, what are they missing? The obvious connections between resource sharing and discovery, and how, the stories that resource sharing librarians gather about the meaning of materials don't necessarily make it back through other domains of library services. So I think it was something that focus group participants resonated with, the idea of thinking about these materials across domains in a life cycle.
And also there's a good point in the chat, if people don't want people to miss it, about whether the issues of vertical integration of data collections and workflow brought up by Roger Schoenfeld were firmly seated in the workflows of researchers. There's the risk that the library gets completely dismissed as an enterprise subscription, as enterprise subscriptions take over. I'm wondering, Kristen, if you would like to talk more about that. I think this is a great time in terms, as we're talking about the life cycle and maybe how to imagine that differently. Would you like to?
Sure. Although I have to say I'm still in somewhat panic mode. Oops, sorry. Especially as I'm, we're working in the IR space as we're developing our tools, and it'll be that whole issue of vertical integration presents a conglomerate of money that helps smooth the process for the researchers. And that's very hard to compete against. And at the same time, we're losing staff amongst many of our libraries as well. And so that ability to sell our services and making sure that our services are thoroughly integrated into the campus workflow is even more difficult, right? We have less staff to bring these things forward. I just really see that there is this risk that, as certainly as the R1 institutions advance, but that will continue to be sidelined. So we need to be even more cognizant in shared print realm that we're not putting up more barriers to the researcher, and that somebody mentioned freed the data, and I think that's a point too about the workflows and the data are now part of the commodity. And so how we're managing all of this has also got to be of ease and of immediate access and benefit to the researchers, or we're going to be cast aside as they find cheaper, easier, integrated solutions into their additional workflows on the campus. So to me, I find this particularly perilous, I think. And yet we have, that trust element that, none of those vertical integrations are going to provide. In fact, there's a high level of distrust around those. And the ownership of this in the academy has a lot of potential. But as people had mentioned, we continue to build out these external workflows in ways that it's going to be very hard for us to redirect both our attention and our money to alternative solutions. And the way that we organize or don't organize across the academy, makes that even more difficult. It's easier to send that money out to a third party commercial entity that provides some gateway funding to get you involved in that. It's a lot harder lift to do the kind of work that you guys have been doing and others have been doing to really understand the environment and then stand something up. And then the lead time that it takes to do that means we lose momentum as well. So there's an element of how quickly we move in the academy that probably needs some rethinking as well. Sorry, just lots of thoughts as I'm dealing with the Roger issue and even our own strategy, in this environment for institutional repositories, let alone how do we manage collections, where are we buying them, what format are we buying them, and what is our potential to continue to lose control and the money gets redirected in that way and away from the library. That's just the underlying risk that I see, in a way that further makes it even harder for us to dig out of that. So when we talk about disruption, I really feel like I feel like we're the boiling frog, right? And if we don't pop out real soon, we're never going to have any opportunity to do so. So Amy, you're probably sorry you asked me about that. I'm in the dark dungeon of despair, I think, to a certain extent, but I definitely welcome the others people screaming disrupt, because that's really where I feel like we should be.
Well, I didn't hear that as despair. I actually heard that as optimism and sort of a call to action, actually. So, and I think that gets, maybe that gets back a little bit to that harmonizing the grassroots and the network. I mean, if we need that call, if we need that action, but we don't want, how do we encourage that action, I guess, but also encourage forward motion rather than, different, different paths, I guess.
Yeah, just thinking at the larger level, what I want out of this is like for us to be able to create cost efficiencies. I was taking away the preservation piece for a minute from shared print, just taking it off the table, is to create cost efficiencies where we can and it makes sense, not just for the sake of cutting costs for institutions, but so that we can focus on the places in our work where the users need us to be inefficient, right? Where it's important for them that we focus efforts and costs for things like distinctive collections, area studies, whatever is important to your individual institutions, sometimes just buying more print copies of something that's needed. And that to me is sort of this larger purpose of we need to focus on, we have to create these efficiencies because there are areas where we continue to need to focus our resources on inefficiencies that are absolutely critical to our users' work.
I know, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Mary there because I love the way you started that, Mary. You said what I want out of this, and I think it really it begins there. You know, what do I want as I serve the users, the scholars, the ecosystem? I think that was just I mean that's embedding it into what you do. So I just wanted to point that out. I also think, so Susan has put in chat an interesting thing, and that sort of gets to the last question about what is missing from our discussion of the collection life cycle, I think. And she focused, she said, maybe actually start the life cycle with the use and users, scholars, you know, the researchers. If it is if the collective collection is in service to them, and I guess to the future them. There are a lot of great comments in the chat. I think what Stephen added, one thing for us not to lose sight of is that for our humanities, arts, and social science faculty, the library and its collections are their research libraries. So we need to make sure our strategies are responsive to the different needs of the different disciplines and scholars. And I'm wondering if, you know, at the beginning, Susan had asked if we had involved, you know, the publishers. But I guess the missing piece here also is that we did not have a focus group of scholars or researchers. And I'm wondering if folks on the conversation have had experience with that and either have some advice or some takeaways from that involvement for us.
You know, Amy, I'm actually gonna jump in on your question if you don't mind. It struck me, you know, being a part of the UC system during the Elsevier agreement development, that one of the strengths of that work, and of course Steve can correct me if I misinterpret anything, is the role that faculty had in advocating for what happens. And, you know, in my work in shared print in the UC system, it's become clear to me that we are missing those faculty advocates, that sort of deep cultivated knowledge and partnership. And I think that's definitely an area where we could improve, and maybe this is a good place to start with this big vision, which if we can bring them into it.
County is starting a campaign of engagement across the disciplines with that same sense that there's differences among the disciplines. And so how we serve them best requires greater outreach. So doing that at the consortial level, you know, we're trying to organize talking points and strategies to move that forward. And we're using David Lewis's recent article, and I can't tell you the name off the top of my head, but I can find it, but link. That was about telling our story in libraries. And one of the questions asked is about where do you see scholarly communication in the next 10 years? And so to tell that story, it's like, well, that scholarly communication differs, even the definition of this, getting back to the definition, amongst disciplines. And so how we as a library start to serve them has to differ as well, in their readiness and their priorities. And so I'll be happy to share any of that we start to develop out, but it is around that do individual library engagement with faculty in an intentional way that we can derive then countywide strategy and priorities.
That would be great, Kristen, if you can share that with us and with the community. That sounds like something really to watch.
Be happy to.
Well, we just have a few more minutes to our scheduled time, and so I just wanted to invite anyone to do any sort of final thoughts, anything you'd like to add. Well, if not, I guess on behalf of Heather and Allison, I just want to say thank you all very, very much for taking the time to talk with us. It's been an extraordinary year for the three of us to collaborate and work together. And it is times like this where we can branch out and widen the conversation that really great learning experiences for us, and just really thrilling to talk with you all, and for me to meet some new people that are invested in this. So thanks so much. And with that, I guess we'll say goodbye.